Hello, everybody, and thank you for joining us for today's webinar on Regional Cumulative Effects Assessment and Management for Mining Transitions. I am Keisha Blaser, and today's webinar is being hosted by the International Association for Impact Assessment, or IAIA. IAIA is the leading global network on using impact assessment for making better and more informed decisions. Next, please. As I said, my name is Keisha Blaser. I will be facilitating today's webinar, though you'll be mainly hearing from your presenters, who you'll meet in just a moment. Now, before we get started, I would like to tell you a little bit more about IAIA and a few of the resources that you can find at our website. So first, we have in our brand new resource library. So if you have been a member for a while or you've been connected with IAIA and you go to our website, you might notice that we've recently done a bit of a refresh. And one of the really neat parts is our resource library, where you can search by topic and publication type to try to find resources that really appeal to your interest and what you are working on. So in that resource library, you can find all of our webinars on demand that we've done historically. So for example, you can see the part 1 of this session. So if you are joining us now and did not join with part 1, you can go back and watch that after the fact. And that webinar explores how regions can assess and manage cumulative mining impacts across multiple operations and development stages. We also have webinars on digital impact assessment, like how to use AI in impact assessment. But we also have a variety of topics like resettlement, biodiversity, human rights, and more. So if you are interested in seeing any of those, please head to our website. Additionally, we also have IAIA 26, our annual conference that's happening this year in Quebec City toward the end of May. Registration is still open for the conference and for side events like training courses, technical visits, and more. So do please go to our website and find more information if you're interested in attending the conference. We also have courses available online that you can take. These courses are short form courses that are done live with an instructor, typically over 3 to 6 sessions held over Zoom. And right now, registration is open for 3 different courses. One is on leadership in environmental and social impact assessment, happening soon here in March. Another course is on IAP2's Fundamentals of Public Participation, happening in early April. And then finally, there's another second course. This one is running right now, actually, but it filled up very quickly. So we're offering a second session on involuntary resettlement planning, livelihood restoration, and social impact assessment that's happening at the end of April and early May. In addition to those shorter online courses, we also have a new program that we've recently launched, which is on-demand training on strategic environmental assessment. Right now, we have courses on foundations of SEA, SEA for decision makers, and various renewable energy sector courses like hydropower, wind power, solar, and bioenergy. These courses are all available on demand, meaning you can register and pay for them and get immediate access to the courses. They range from about 30 minutes to 60 minutes, depending on your familiarity with the topic, and you do get a certificate of completion when you are done with the course. So if you have any questions about that, feel free to contact me at keisha@iaia.org, but again, more information is on our website. And then we also have online training and mentorship through our longer form courses, which fall under our professional development program. We have 2 different courses. One is on the foundations of environmental impact assessment, and the second course is on social impact assessment. These are 12-week courses that are about 30 to 40 hours per course. And the next ones run from June through August, but registration is open now. So please go to our website and find more information there. And finally, in addition to all of those paid courses, we do also have free downloadable publications like our best practice principles, IA fast tips, and more. Next, please. Now, a few pieces of housekeeping before we get started. On your GoToWebinar panel, whether you're joining in the app or on your desktop, you should have a few different options available on the top right of your screen. So first, in the chat, if there are any important information or messages that need to come from me to all of you attendees, I'll put those in the chat for you. Next up is probably the most important for you is the questions tab. So at the end of today's webinar, we will have about 15 minutes, depending on our time, for Q&A with the presenters, but don't feel like you have to wait till the end to put in your questions. If at any point during this session you hear something that sparks a question for you, please feel free to type it into the questions box, and the presenters will hopefully have time to answer your question during the Q&A. And if they don't, I will still send them all your questions, and we could potentially find time for another webinar down the road if there are a lot of questions that need to still be addressed. Next up, if you go to the Materials tab, you will find the presentation for today's webinar that you can follow along with if you would like. And then finally, if you have any issues with your sound or audio or the video as the webinar goes on, please go to the Settings tab. And then lastly, today's webinar is being recorded, so whether you would like to revisit it or share it with somebody else, it will be available in our resource library in about 2 days. Next, please. So as I mentioned, today's webinar is being facilitated by IAIA, but you will mainly be hearing from a few presenters. First, we have Jenny Pope, Monica Maharjan, Will Rifkin, and Jessica Reeves. So with that, Jenny, I believe it is over to you. We are having a quick bit of delay getting one of our presenters back connected, so please give us a bit of patience and we will get started as soon as possible.
Hello, everybody. Sorry about that. I dropped out, but I assume that we're at the point where I need to speak now that I'm back in. Hi, everybody. I'm Jenny Pope. I'm a long-term IAIA member and a consultant and researcher based in Western Australia. I spoke last week, so I'm really just going to give a very, very brief recap of some of the key concepts from stage 1 of the research before I hand over to my colleagues who are involved in stage 2. Thanks, Monica. I'd like to start by acknowledging the traditional custodians throughout Australia and their continuing connections to the lands, waters and communities. And I'd like to pay our respects to all First Nations peoples and communities and to elders past and present. And I'm speaking today from Wilman Noongar Budja. Thanks, Monica. Just a very brief introduction to the Cooperative Research Centre for Transformations in Mining Economies, or CRC-TIME, which is the organisation through which this research was conducted. This is a collaboration between industry, the Australian government and research institutions with a vision that post-mining transitions are valued and enabled to create enduring benefit for all Australians. It brings together diverse stakeholders to help reimagine and transform mine closure and post-mine transitions. The reason that this project on regional cumulative effects assessment and management was commenced was that when CRC-TIME kicked off, there were 8 research priorities, and you can see there that priority 7 is assessing and predicting cumulative impacts. So it was recognised very early on that looking at the cumulative impacts of mine closure, both dealing with the negative cumulative legacies of mining, but also looking to try to leverage positive opportunities as communities transition from mining to post-mining economies and post-mining futures, was a really important part of the transition process. Thanks, Monica. So this research project regional cumulative effects assessment and management to support transitions in mining economies is being rolled out over 3 stages. So stage 1 was in 2023-24, and that was really trying to answer the question of what is regional cumulative effect assessment and management. There was a general agreement that this was a really good thing to do, but a lack of clarity about what exactly this could look like. And so research was conducted looking at different case studies, mostly from Australia and Canada, of what RCEAM could actually be. And then some thinking was done as to what that could mean for mine culture. That culminated in a typology, which I'll show you just in a moment. Stage 2 has been conducted over 2024-25, and that was really about developing capacity. Raquel spoke last week on Indigenous involvement. Monica will speak on tools for RCEAM, and we'll speak about governance for RCEAM. And then the hope is that there'll be stage 3, which will be at least one pilot study where we'll get to test some of these things out and learn by doing in practice. Thanks, Monica. And I won't go through all this in detail again, but just to highlight that one of the key things that came out of stage 1 was this typology, which identified that there are many reasons why you might want to do a regional cumulative effects assessment and management. There can be different purposes, and depending on the purpose, it's important to design the process so that it delivers the right outputs. And it's very important to have this done and to have this very clear right at the beginning, because they can be very time intensive and resource intensive processes. And it's important that the information that's generated is what's needed to make decisions and to progress with the process, in this case, mining transitions. There's also quite a variety in terms of who does these, in terms of initiation, but also the process coordination, and we'll speak more to that later this morning. And also the scope, and what type of process it is, whether it's a regulatory or non-regulatory process, whether it's a one-off or an ongoing process. So there was a very broad breadth of different types of processes. So all of these are potentially relevant to mining transitions. And I'll now hand over to Monica, who's going to talk about the processes and the tools that might be applied.
Monica, we don't seem to hear you, just to let you know.
Monica, we can't hear you.
Hi, everyone. Can you hear me now?
Yes. Thank you.
I'm really sorry about that technical glitch. So I'll start over. Once again, thank you, everyone, for being patient with me. I'm Monica. I'm research fellow at Harry Butler Institute, Modoc University. So today, I'll be sharing with you different stages of RCEAM process. And I'll also present a toolkit where I'll show different categories of methods for implementing RCEAM. So starting with this RCEAM process roadmap. So the figure here shows the RCEAM process roadmap. So there are 3 distinct phases: pre-assessment phase, which is followed by assessment phase and post-assessment phase. So each phase has its own elements. So as this, Jenny has discussed before during the first session of the webinar, the RCEAM could be like a one-off or an ongoing process. So depending on the purpose or the objective of the assessment itself. So in an ongoing RCEAM process, after the implementation of monitoring and management plans, it can go back to either assessment phase or depending on the prioritized valued components considered for the assessment, the process might need to be scoped and planned again. So it can again start with the planning phase. So one thing that need to be noted is that the practitioners may not necessarily start with the planning phase. Some regions could already be ready for the assessment phase. So it's important to identify where they are in this process. So the pre-assessment phase, the first phase is basically the planning phase. As we know, RCEAM demands a lot of time and resources, and it can be really costly if not planned well. So, deciding valued components and setting regional boundaries and proposing the imperative of the assessment are very crucial and should be done keeping in mind, of course, the objective of the assessment. It's important to start with a manageable number of valued components while starting the RCEAM process. This is mainly to avoid, placing unnecessary pressures on the team who are conducting RCEAM. The scope of the valid components can then later be broadened on if and as necessary. So in this sense, RCEAM is an iterative process. Well, you can see a lot of elements here in this phase, excuse me, but they don't need to be carried out in a sequential order. However, RCEAM process should begin by readiness assessment. And a readiness assessment is recommended to be based on the collective impact approach. So this allows multiple stakeholders of the region to look at issues and also the opportunities available through the same lens. So readiness assessment helps to find out, if all stakeholders, including the communities, if they have the necessary conditions for collaboration and also the resources for the assessment of cumulative effects in the region. The RCEAM process essentially hinges on a collaborative approach between different stakeholders, including mining companies. So the most crucial thing is that there should be collaboration. And for that collaboration, the data sharing between companies is very, very important. But here in Australia, there has been a lot of concerns for data privacy and the competitive advantage, which are kind of challenging data sharing for these kind of assessments. And also the fact that the environmental data are usually scattered in different systems and also in different formats. That has been challenging the data integration as well. So apparently, the data sharing ecosystem here, especially in mining sector, is not well developed, and that has been kind of creating problems for collaborations. So industry data governance for data sharing and data management definitely deserves some attention. So the assessment phase, either retrospective or prospective assessments or both can be carried out depending on the purpose of the RCEAM. Retrospective assessments are helpful in understanding accumulated impacts over the years, including both past and present effects. And for this, mostly spatial tools such as GIS or satellite imageries can be helpful. And also there are many analytical tools available for that. So one example of such assessment would be Manitoba Hydro-Regional Cumulative Effect Assessment in Canada. So the purpose of that cumulative effect assessment was to collect and organize data that would have been lost otherwise. So that retrospective analysis helped them understand the cumulative effects of past developments and document the current status of the environment. So it was very helpful for them to make decisions about the additional projects in Nelson River system there. So likewise, the prospective assessment is needed to look into potential future effects. So it basically enables strategic regional planning. So this kind of assessment is especially crucial for making decisions on post-mine land uses and also the impacts of mine closure. For these kind of assessments, modeling tools such as hydrological models, landscape connectivity models, and other different models can be helpful. So post-assessment phase, after assessing cumulative effects on prioritized valued components in the assessment phase, the significance of each impact is then evaluated here in this phase in order to determine the acceptability of each scenario. So based on the significance of impact, the decision is then made and implemented. So significance typically reflects, the substantial environmental change, and it should be assessed against RCEAM objectives and maybe the agreed thresholds for the impact. Likewise, monitoring is very crucial in RCEAM process. First, it helps identify management triggers, and it also supports decision making on land and resources uses and their allocation. Additionally, it can detect the changes in the conditions of valued components, and this helps evaluate the acceptability of the cumulative effects. So most of all, monitoring helps in adaptive management, which is so much important in the context of regional level assessments like RCEAM. For monitoring and management, especially the long-term monitoring and management, collaborative tools such as community-based monitoring programs have been found to be effective. One example is Metlakatla Cumulative Effects Management Program, where indigenous community have been able to monitor and manage their prioritized valued components continuously for many, many years. So coming to the toolkit that we have developed contains 20 tools and methods which have been widely used in environmental impact assessments and cumulative effect assessments. And they fall into 5 categories as shown here: spatial, analytical, modeling, participatory, and collaborative. And these tools can address environmental, social, cultural, and economic valued components. So the selection of tools basically depends on the particular cumulative effects or issues being assessed, also the objective of the assessment and the valued components or the indicator of concern, as well as the data available or the resources available to the people conducting the assessment. So coming to some key findings. So RCEAM can potentially minimize the repetition of works by individual projects, and so it can minimize the cost of overall regional planning, development planning actually. But as I mentioned, as Jenny also mentioned, it can be very costly and time-consuming as well if the objective is not defined clearly from the very beginning. For RCEAM, collaboration is the key to success, but currently it's kind of constrained by poor data sharing practice. Another challenge with the RCEAM is the broader national uptake of the RCEAM, because up until now there's no unified national law or a standardized methodology or guidance on RCEAM. And the problem is especially visible when it comes to social impact assessments. So when it comes to social impact assessments, usually project-specific approaches have been taken. So the toolkit is meant for cross-disciplinary kind of assessments, not for like narrow or siloed analysis. So the tools and methods, in our toolkit have like limited utility if considered for isolated disciplinary applications. But its relevance increases in collaborative context where the toolkit can serve as a breeze for interdisciplinary understanding and also coordination between the people. So another thing is that toolkit is not an exhaustive list of methods. It can and it should evolve in the future, so that we can include more robust modeling tools and other tools that can integrate Western science and traditional knowledge better. So some of the recommendations for roadmap is that while implementing RCEAM, we should consider the regional differences. Each RCEAM would be different for different reasons and prioritized valued components. So it's crucial also to secure funding at the planning phase so that it can be continued. Well, RCEAM is a relatively new and emerging concept among environmental impact assessment practitioners in Australia, although the underlying ideas have been there for like many years. So it's very important to harness the power of individual champions and their relationships with different organizations in order to move this idea forward. And one of the issues is data sharing, as I've been saying that. So in order to improve data sharing ecosystem here, I think a legislative mandate is very necessary. So one of the challenges for toolkit is to ensure that it's widely accessible. So our recommendation is that the roadmap as well as toolkit both are supported by the development of online knowledge base and interactive resources. Likewise, the tailored programs and knowledge sharing sessions will definitely help raise the awareness and user capabilities across diverse stakeholders group. So with this, I end my presentation and I now hand over to Will to continue. Thank you very much.
Great. I'm Will Rifkin. I'm an emeritus professor at the University of Newcastle, Australia. I've been looking at cumulative impacts for the past dozen years or so and led development of the Boomtown indicators as a way of characterizing the social and economic impacts on towns in an agricultural area of Queensland, Australia, undergoing $40 billion of onshore natural gas development. My focus this morning is on models of governance for RCEAM. Next slide, please. So governance is basically about decision-making, about who's in charge. And for this corner of this work, I was asked to look at three models. Options for the Australian, or identified for the Australian context. The notion of a lead agency in government that extends its remit to a regional focus, the establishment of a new authority, saying here are your resources, here are your staff, here are the issues you're meant to deal with within this region, or voluntary collaboration among diverse interests, such as what you see to some extent in the Hunter Valley region of Australia, coal mining region, where there's something called the Upper Hunter Mining Dialogue, where companies and some representatives of local government get together on a regular basis. Looking at examples has been revealing. Some of these examples were unearthed in a look for how to handle mining and mined land rehabilitation in the Latrobe Valley of Victoria. Other really interesting examples have emerged in river basins in the US. One example of that being the CalFed collaboration among dozens of government agencies in the river delta that feeds into the north of San Francisco Bay. It's a a collaboration that lasted for about a decade, and it's been well studied. One favorably viewed example in Australia and internationally is the Great Barrier Reef Marine Park Authority, where the marine park is offshore, but it's affected by what's happening in rivers onshore, agricultural work, mining work, and other sorts of development. And they've gotten a bunch of people under one umbrella, one specially established government authority. There's also the Queensland Office of Groundwater Impact Assessment that looks at the impacts on groundwater from coal seam gas development in an area where local landholders depend on some of that underground water. Next slide, please. So again, when it comes to governance, the promise is that you'll have a coordinated regional view on decision making. And I'm looking at, when I looked at this area, I looked at not only governance of the assessment process, but governance of the decision making that's meant, involving the decision making that's meant to follow on once you have an assessment. The promise is that it's coordinated, everybody's under the same tent, they're speaking from the same song sheet, and they sort out their differences. The perils are shown in case analysis that suggests industry reluctance to ask for more governance, and even to get involved in collaborative governance, because it invariably means more cost, more complexity, and more uncertainty. So you take powerful multinational organizations who have invested hundreds of millions, if not billions of dollars, and you ask them to surrender some power, and that's not going to happen easily. So the task is that we have a sense of what to try, that is how to set up committees and subcommittees and steering committees. The question is, how do you get from where we are into something that looks more regionally coordinated? What are the next steps? And some would argue this is characteristic of a wicked problem. Once you think you've got a solution to a wicked problem, there's a step between what you feel you need to do and what you're doing right now. And it's particularly problematic when there are people like you, many of you, who are not in charge. So what do you do if you're somebody who believes in RCEAM, but you're not the one, you're not running a government agency, you're not managing director of a mining operation? Next slide, please. So these yellow highlights are things where you have experiences and insights that are relevant. So one of the key issues is buy-in. When you have multiple parties, could be multiple mining companies, communities, First Nations groups, they need to have areas of common focus. They need to be committing to working together over time. They actually need to invest time, energy, and monetary resources. And as these relationships evolve, they may even want to form some sort of corporation, some sort of legal agreement among them to help them move forward. The structures that we've seen in the examples are pretty common. You have steering committees that represent the stakeholder groups and organizations from industry, government, non-government organizations, First Nation groups and communities. And then you have expert committees involving specific types of specialists. That could be in water, vegetation, cultural impacts, or socioeconomic impacts. Next slide, please. So what you're looking for is alignment. You want these people to be talking about what's their vision for the region. They need to break that down, saying if that's where we want to head, what should we be doing on an annual agenda? What should we do over the next 12 months? And that can involve some projects. And this notion of, it's come up in the legal arena, of deliberate speed. That is, how do you get people to say more than just, I want to collaborate and actually do something, get something done, while at the same time allowing the time for groups that may need to sort out within their own, let's say a single First Nations group or multiple First Nations group or multiple companies, saying, we just need some time to figure out what we want to be doing together, where we, as an interest group, where we would like to go before we even discuss it with other people. Then there should be accountability mechanisms, and this has emerged in the study of common pool resources. When people are sharing something, how do they make sure there's follow through, that people are actually answerable? You go to a meeting, you agree on something, you go back to your mining company or your community organization, your government agency. How do you get them to follow through? What are those accountability mechanisms? And then developing collaborative projects that are made up of elements of things your organization wants to do anyway. So how do you take what's already happening and just tweak it so you get more alignment? And what's critical in these processes are change agents, intermediaries who are helping this collaboration to work. There's a process called meta-governance. So it's not governance where some central organization makes a decision, but somebody saying, we could work together if these two parties actually talk to each other, and they make a play date for those parties to have those conversations to sort out their differences. So intermediaries, intermediates are an essential part of this process. And some of these things are fleshed out in that notion of collective impact that Monica referred to earlier, that has 5 elements that have emerged in the social services sector: common agenda, shared measurement, that data sharing element, mutually reinforcing activities, continuous communication, and a backbone support organization, people who run around making sure that the parties involved keep talking to each other and actually move ahead. Next slide, please. So from the research and consultation, the realizations emerge. These are things that you're well aware of. Ideally, you'd go into a region with a clean slate, no projects, everybody would start together. But in reality, mining's occurring in settings where there are already operating mining companies at different stages of operation. Ideally, you want the partners to be open-minded and trusting set of stakeholders, trusting one another, but you have existing relationships, with some of which are historically positive and others of which may have historically involved some conflict. Ideally, each stakeholder organization would be coherent in where they're headed and will be consistent over time. In reality, you'll have differences of opinion within organizations, and you'll have directions for organizations that will change over time. Ideally, you'll have an integration across environmental, social, economic, and cultural impact assessment. In reality, that's too messy. You just have to start with some disciplines where the low-hanging fruit is, whether that's water or vegetation or socioeconomic impacts. Ideally, you'd like a planning orientation exploring possibilities for land use planning in the region. In reality, you'll have some near-term focus on regulatory requirements, and but you can perhaps tap into that, saying where is there a roadblock or where is there an opportunity. Next slide, please. So the key findings put very briefly from this segment of the study is there's a lot of complexity in RCEAM governance. That comes from historical relationships among organizations and stakeholders, evolving changes in the context, whether that's regulation or climate change or financial requirement shifts in the market, and changes in key personnel that can really hang things up when you have a champion who moves on. There are diversity of approaches that might work. The book 102 Things to Do with a Hole in the Ground is a great example of that diversity of approaches, where people have pressed on over years and over decades to implement a particular vision. Those case studies are very short, a page or two, and it really doesn't get into the nitty-gritty of when was that pivotal meeting and what was said so things actually move together in a collaborative way. You have examples from Indigenous-led strategies in Canada, where they have the backing of legislation and law, as well as ongoing attachment to place, to a region. And you have your own experiences where you've seen where organizations have gotten along and collaborated, and you want to see how you can build on that. Next slide, please. So the time frame, again, it's not months. This is something that could take a decade or multiple decades to evolve over time. And you have those options that were laid out at the beginning, government agency with an expanded mandate, an independent government authority, or collaborative governance, but they could be seen not as necessarily as immediate options, but as phases where the collaboration will use one mechanism or another. And it'll all depend upon where the champions reside, and it could be somebody like you, and what the legislation supports. Next slide, please. So in sum, the notion is build on existing collaboration and cooperation. As Monica alluded to, assess readiness of potential partners. And as Jess will discuss in a minute, that notion of readiness. Ideally, you'd incorporate environmental, social, cultural, and economic elements, but probably not at the start. You've got to start somewhere with the low-hanging fruit. And ideally, you'd start in a tabula rasa, but in reality, you're going to be building on what's already happening to get RCEAM going. All right, next slide, please. That's it from me.
Many thanks, Will, and many thanks, Monica. I'm Jess Reeves. I'm based in the Latrobe Valley in Gippsland in Australia. It's one of our brown coal mining areas where we're seeing a phase out of our brown coal fire power generation. So we are definitely living transition. Formerly a geologist, now working in social science around transformations in regional economies. And I've just stepped into the role of leading this RCEAM project through to its next phase. So I'd first like to give gratitude to Darren Murphy, who led this project through stage 2. Next slide, please, Monica. So building on from the process roadmap that Monica shared with you earlier, we're right at the start of implementing or thinking about how we might undertake a pilot of the research we've undertaken to develop the RCEAM process. So this is looking at the readiness assessment and the readiness criteria. So when we gave the previous presentation last week, there were a lot of comments about what does this mean practically? What does this mean on the ground? And Will's given some great examples of where we have learnt from experience from others who have published in this space and worked in this space. But now we're preparing ourselves to implement ourselves. The RCEAM ourselves. So we've just completed an alignment survey with the partners from across Australia to see where we might implement the pilot of this project. So we've established our readiness criteria. We're working on developing our pilot region and doing our scoping and co-design and assessment through this stage to see how this might be played out. Next slide, please, Monica. And as the others mentioned, one of the key things that enable an RCEAM to happen is an agreement through a range of different stakeholders of what a valued component or components are. So having a common valued area that people are interested to develop, and this is across a range of different organisations. But also, where is the space for RCEAM to happen? In many cases, this is going to be outside of the immediate regulatory environment and perhaps more for future planning, such as mine closure planning or post-mine land use planning, perhaps creating a new sandpit where different ideas can come together that can help inform each of the individual partners in how they move forward. So first working out what this valued component is, and then the need or the urgency for taking this cumulative regional impact approach. Also, that's another key component of the readiness criteria is ensuring that the knowledge is available to be shared. Now, this includes both data, but it also includes the social and the political capital, the willingness and the ability for the various partners to be able to contribute in this space. And this is going to require resourcing in terms of time, in terms of knowledge capacity, and in terms of having common databases that can actually speak to one another. So there are quite a number of pre-steps needed to be undertaken for an RCEAM to be the most successful. And as Will just alluded to, the maturity of governance is critically important to this. Who is actually going to be the custodian of the RCEAM process, and how do we organise data sharing between the organisations in order to be able to achieve a common outcome? So it's really critical that this value component is shared and there is someone or a coalition of the willing to be able to champion this value component the whole way through the RCEAM process. Next slide, please, Monica. Again, drawing on other examples, RCEAM is quite a messy space. We have a lot of individual organisations with different areas of expertise and different core interests. So there may not be one single valued component, there may be a range of valued components that build in towards an RCEAM. But in order for an RCEAM to be successful, you want representation at a steering committee level from across this breadth of both stakeholders and rights holders, but also areas of expertise as well. And again, an organisation who is going to drive the process for it to be successful. Next slide, please, Monica. Now, in some of the work that we have done within our own steering committee and our own stakeholder and rights holder groups, what is coming out in Australia is a key area of shared interest and perhaps being closest to meeting the readiness criteria is the Upper Fortescue area of the Pilbara. So the Pilbara is in Western Australia, and it's our premier site for iron ore extraction. So the Upper Fortescue area is this region up to the in the east of the slide here. There are around 20 iron ore mines here and around $30 billion of gross regional product from this region alone, amounting to around 70,000 jobs. It's also home to at least 5 traditional owner groups who are all rights holders to this area. And the workforce here is largely fly-in, fly-out, so highly variable communities in this area. Next slide, please, Monica. Just to give you an indication of the number of stakeholders and rights holders just in this small area. So we have, as I mentioned, representation from a range of different First Nations communities. There are at least 5 different operators in this area, and of course, government representation at both a state and a local and a federal level. And of course the researchers involved in this area as well. So we're working with each of these stakeholders and rights holders in order to determine what the shared valued components are and undertake the RCEAM process. Next slide, please, Monica. In terms of common valued components and areas of shared interest, because of the intense scale of the iron ore mining here, we're seeing impacts on water level and quality, both for dewatering of the mines to access the iron ore, but also potential of use of water for filling the pit voids once mining has ceased. We have competition for access to land and resources between the different operators. We also have a very unique ecological environment as well, and there are various works underway already looking at the cumulative impact of the ecology through each of these operations, both through opening and through closure as well. And of course, there's a very significant impact from the social and cultural perspectives here, both in terms of living pressure, having these miners' camps set up in various areas where operations take place, but also the long-term rights holders, the First Nations people, for whom this will always be home. What happens when mining leaves this area is that's going to have a very significant impact both on the transitional workforce, but also the permanent population as well. So really within this cornucopia of different challenges here, choosing a key element or a key valued component to focus the RCEAM on is going to be critical. Next slide, please, Monica. So as I mentioned at the end of last year, we undertook this scoping and design work and looked at the readiness assessment for the Upper Fortescue area. And the feedback that we got from that was very similar, both from the traditional owner organisations and industry as well, that it's going to be necessary for those parties to go back to their respective boards or committees to be able to make decisions and to have access to data as well. So trying to manage internally within organisations, getting the right people to the table and having true engagement does take time. But there is a great willingness to undertake an RCEAM approach in this area, particularly to incorporate not just the environmental, but the social and cultural aspects as well. But we also need to, as a research group, undertake this process as well by taking the time and undertaking deep listening to ensure that we have a valuable RCEAM to be able to deliver. Next slide, please, Monica. So just to finish off where Jenny started in terms of the process of where we're at with our RCEAM, this is in a little bit more detail to the high-level view she presented earlier. So the foundation projects have been undertaken. Jenny spoke to stage 1 in developing the RCEAM topology that she presented in the session last week. We are completing stage 2, which is all of the tools that have been developed, and I'll have a link to these on our final slide. And then we're hoping to move into the operationalization of RCEAM and the implementation of the pilot in stage 3, hopefully later this year. Next slide, please, Monica. And just to thank you to the many project partners that we have throughout this RCEAM process. You can see we've got national representation here, both in terms of operators and research departments, and it is critical that we have their participation in order for this to be successful. Next and last slide, please, Monica. So I'd like to thank you all for your attention today. If this QR code here takes you to a link to where the reports of the outcomes of stage 2 have been published, this will be shared afterwards as well. And I would like to invite Raquel to take charge of the questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Jess, and thank you, Monica, Jenny, and Will as well. We have some interesting questions here, and I made a selection for us to have some time to answer at least one each. So the first one goes to Monica. What role do communities play in defining acceptable cumulative impacts thresholds?
All right, thank you, Raquel. So the question was, what role communities play in defining the thresholds?
Mm-hmm.
In defining the thresholds. Do you mind repeating the question once again?
Yes, in fact, it's what importance the communities have. And I could say not only to define the thresholds, but in the whole process.
Yeah, thank you for the question. Well, the role of communities in defining, in actually shaping the whole RCEAM process is very critical, because, you know, the essence of RCEAM is to find the impact or effects on the valued components that they prioritize for themselves in the region. So their view on what is the acceptable limit of the impacts on their valued components, it's all on, you know, their view. As an ecologist, I might put a lot of value on certain species, or as a hydrologist, I might put a value on certain piece of water body, on certain water bodies. But for them, you know, it could be a different valued components and different level of impacts. So yeah, they play a central role, I think, in actually you know, shaping the whole process. So they have a strong say. That's why we are advocating for kind of co-leading the process, not just, you know, participating, not just their superficial participation, but their core participation, or, you know, co-managing everything. Thank you.
Thank you, Monica. Excellent. The other one for Jenny. Are there any concrete examples where cumulative assessment has actually influenced a strategic or regulatory decision?
Yeah, there are lots. So a couple of the case studies that I talked about last week were done under regulatory processes. So, for example, the Great Barrier Reef Strategic Assessment was done under the Australian National Environment Protection and Biodiversity Conservation Act. So it really, and there are pros and cons of whether processes, whether there's it's obviously good to have the regulatory teeth that says, yes, you need to do this process, but it can also limit the outcomes and the implementation as well, because there's less flexibility, I suppose. So Canada also has the options for regional assessments under the Impact Assessment Act 2019, and I know that there's quite a few now coming through that system. So there can be regulatory. I guess in our context, as far as we're aware, there are no requirements anywhere for regional cumulative effect assessment to be undertaken specifically for mine closure and mining transitions. There's no trigger where government can say, okay, you now need to do this process in this region as mines close, and that's really the governance challenge that Will's been speaking to.
Thank you, Jenny, and perhaps this is one of the contributions of our project in the Australia context. And the other one is for Will. With all the regulatory reporting, actioning, and complying with impact benefit agreements that a company already has to meet, how does one incentivize a company to do what seems to be extra work?
Can you ask me an easier question? Yes, with all of the regulatory
summarizing is with all the regulatory requirements.
Yeah, I've got it. No, with all of the regulatory requirements, how do you incentivize the company? And that's the challenge for the people listening, is figuring out where are the leverage points in your organization. Because in reality, we as academics don't go to the managing director and say, we've got a report, now do what we suggest, and we've developed some incentives. Often people have to co-develop the incentives themselves, and individuals within organizations will need to be change agents, saying, how do I get the thin edge of the wedge in, slip in, giving a little bit of an opportunity. But partly it's what Jess talked about, its readiness, is can you identify a burning platform and develop a methodology about that people really, the companies really have to change what they're doing, and government has to shift a bit. That's a great question.
And Will, possibly we can add as well that RCEAM can contribute to an ongoing social license to operate, for example, can enhance the environmental, social, and governance of a company, can also enhance the quality and genuinity of the corporate social environmental responsibility, can contribute to risk mitigation and cost management, and also regulatory compliance. So we think that RCEAM is really promising in this field. The other question goes to Jess, and it's about, I'd like to understand from presenters, what is the expected methodology to conduct an environmental impact assessment for mining sector? Would it always be a case for cumulative impact, or only the impact assessment would be? Or sometimes cumulative is treated just as a subchapter of the wider environmental strategic impact assessment or the strategic environmental assessment?
Thank you, Raquel. There's a lot in that question. In terms of expected methodologies, I would direct the questioner to Monica's report that goes to the toolkit that lists a whole range of different resources that can be implemented around environmental impact assessments. And depending on your regulatory environment, there may be specific guidelines that you'll need to follow there. I think, though, where the benefit in true cumulative impact is when there is a truly shared resource, and a resource may be the community, it may be water, it may be overarching biodiversity impact. So looking at the Latrobe Valley case where I am at the moment, we have 3 large open cut mines that are all proposing to have final landforms as pit lakes, with one resource being shared, which is water. So having individual approval for each of those is kind of meaningless unless you can understand what the cumulative impact of all 3 going to be filled with water is going to have on the downstream receptors to that. So it's taking that larger look, that true regional look, and what does it mean, not just in the footprint of mining, but what's happening, in this case, literally downstream, but importantly to the receptor or the host communities as well, which are going to be feeling the multiple impacts of the various operations there.
Wonderful, thank you. Keisha, can we ask more questions? We are just on time.
Yes, feel free. If anybody does need to leave, you can leave now, but we will just keep going a couple minutes to ask one or two more questions maybe.
Okay, wonderful. So we have another one here, can be to anybody. And how would the EU apply regional cumulative impact assessment on energy transition? And what detail of research is needed to inform the RCEAM?
Are you going to take this one, Will, or shall I?
Or we can both speak at the same time. I'll let you start.
So I think this is a key question that I'm grappling with at the moment as a region undergoing significant energy transition away from coal-fired power generation to predominantly offshore wind generation. And with our current state government policy suggesting that independent operators can undertake their environmental effects assessments and their community consultations individually. So when we have at least 9 new proponents in the area all asking the same communities the same questions, then there is definitely a space for a community-led cumulative assessment of the multiple projects at once. And that's not to mention the other things that are happening in terms of transmission lines, in terms of critical mineral mines, in terms of solar farms and all the various projects. So I think if we take this from a place-based and a community-based perspective rather than a project-by-project space or perspective, then that's the true beauty of our cumulative impact.
Yeah, and I'd agree. And I guess what's intriguing is that, for many of us, somebody comes to us with a plan and a project, and then we execute it. And are we giving you advice on how to execute a project? Well, here, when it gets to RCEAM, nobody's going to hire you to do RCEAM. You're going to say, for the energy transition in the Hunter Valley coal mining region where I'm working, and I can look out the window and see the world's largest coal export facility, you realize state government, local government's doing one thing, state government something else, federal government something else, multinational mining companies have their own plans, and it's up to people like us to run around and get people talking to each other so there's more coherence developed. And you'll get coherence in one meeting, and 2 months later, it's not there. So it's very much an arena with the energy transition where it needs people like us, and like yourselves, who kind of have our head around RCEAM, realize how messy it is, and realize it's about relationship building. There's the aspiration there, but a lot of it is just getting people to talk to each other and finding opportunities to implement, whether they're company policies or state policies. So yeah, great opportunity, but it'll be missed unless people do that meta governance and mess with the system.
Thank you, Will. We have 2 more questions from participants who registered for this webinar, but I don't know if they are here exactly. They posed the questions beforehand. So, but they are really interesting questions, so I will make those. One is, could you explain how this aligns or overlaps or enhances the ICMM integrated framework?
I think Jenny would be a great person to respond to that.
So I'm going to flick that one back to you guys who've been involved more recently, because I'm not up to date with the current RCEAM framework.
I'm not up to date on it.
Can I jump in? Go, Jess. So mainly what I can say is that the proposal of the regional cumulative effects assessment and management, it increases broaden the scale to a regional scale than project by project, suggested by the ICMM integrated framework, and also by broadening the scope and the geographical area, it means involving more communities and proponents as well. So in fact, it's enhancing the framework. And last question, it's about, do you have more examples of cumulative impacts being assessed in Latin America?
I can just jump
Monica,
in and say that we didn't specifically look in Latin America with the initial case studies for stage 1. I'm not sure whether perhaps some of my colleagues looked at anything in stage 2, but we limited ourselves to where there were 2 sort of big bodies of work, which was Australia and Canada for stage 1.
In relation to the literature review, in this case that I'm talking about, it was about the indigenous-led RCEAM, the Regional Cumulative Effect Assessment and Management. Almost nothing came from Latin America and the Caribbean area. But what I know, I'm from Brazil originally, and what I know that some work has been done in Colombia, Mexico, and Brazil, but at project scale, local scale, not regional scale. It's not legislated yet. And I'm putting here in the chats a link for a practical guide for cumulative impact assessment and management, Latin America and the Caribbean, that can be useful for you all. And I think this is the end. And thank you so much for being here, for the answers, and for listening to us.
Perfect. Thank you, everybody. First off, thank you to you presenters. That was a great presentation and great Q&A. And thank you all attendees for joining us. We know your time is valuable, and we really appreciate you taking some time today to spend with us. So as you leave, you'll be prompted to fill out an evaluation of today's webinar. Please do fill this out. It's really valuable for us to give us some insight, not only into how we did today, but also into topics you might be interested in for future webinars. And some other questions too. So please fill it out, and we will do our best to find the presenters and time to put together a webinar for future topics that you suggest. So again, thank you for spending the time with us today. Thank you, presenters, and we will see you next time.
Thank you.